Alright guys, I'm excited to bring y'all another mock draft. I've given y'all one from the very early position of the 1 spot. Then afterwards we have done a later position at the 10 spot. Now I'm going to go right in the middle of the draft at the 106 and try to build a team through this way. Y'all are going to hear my thoughts. Y'all are going to hear my commentary as we go through the entire draft. And if you would like to participate in the next mock draft, make sure you go down to the description of the video. There's a link to join our completely free Discord chat. I'm pretty sure you don't even have to make an email or an account or anything, and you will get the links to join the mocks through there, as well as a ton of great fantasy football discussion. But now let's not waste any more time and let's begin this mock draft. And I have a feeling that we are going to see a couple of these 3-down running backs go off the board. Christian McCaffrey starts us off. You're going to see this in almost every single fantasy football draft this offseason. But now we're going to wait. I'm projecting this to be Saquon Barkley. I think that would be my pick here at 2. But let's try to go down the line and talk about strategy going at the 106. The reason I picked this position is it's kind of hard. You don't necessarily know where you're going to go. I'm just kind of praying that we get a Michael Thomas or Dalvin Cook, and that is going to happen as we see the top 4 running backs go off the board. I don't know who I would necessarily prefer here, but we don't necessarily even have the option to go with Michael Thomas. I think the clear pick is Dalvin Cook. I've seen Clyde Edwards-Helaire creep up into these top 5 players as of late, and that's mainly due to Dalvin Cook's holdout concerns. But I'm not going to try to take the high floor player with Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I would rather just go for the ceiling with Dalvin Cook because we are going to play to win the championship. Now here, when we're going back in the 2 through 4 rounds, I think we're going to be looking at wide receiver unless we see a significant value fall to us. But this is where I find a ton of wide receiver value throughout the entire draft, with everyone going extremely running back heavy. And who knows, maybe in that 3rd round we will be in a play for a Patrick Mahomes or a Lamar Jackson. But guys, please, if you all are not subscribed to the channel at this moment, please go down there and do so. I'm going to continue to bring y'all fantasy football content over the next few months. And y'all know I pretty much bring a video every single day. It's high-end fantasy football content, and this is the season for it. Make sure you go down there and hit that subscribe and like button. But we continue to see this running back run. At this point, at the 207, I'm really hoping that we get a Tyreek Hill fall to us. I don't want to be picking between Nick Chubb or Aaron Jones. I expect both of these running backs to really regress in 2020. Aaron Jones mainly due to his touchdown variability, where I don't think he's going to be able to score as high of a touchdown number as he did in 2019 and 2020. And with Nick Chubb, I am concerned about him going out there and getting his passing work stolen by Kareem Hunt. But now we're here. Aaron Jones is staring us in the face, as well as Deandre Hopkins, Chris Godwin. This is the horrible, horrible, horrible part of the draft. And I want to go Travis Kelce, but we know that we're going to be able to find a ton of value later on. I think I'm going to just have to suck it up and take DeAndre Hopkins, a player that I've mainly been avoiding in fantasy drafts as of late, but I don't see any other option here outside of Aaron Jones. And like I said earlier, I really don't want to start with Aaron Jones. The only way that I would go that route is if we see all these tier 2 wide receivers come off the board, but I don't think DeAndre Hopkins is going to put up the similar production that we've seen in years past, mainly due to switching offenses, and Cliff Kingsbury and Kyler Murray are going to want to spread the ball out and not necessarily give DeAndre Hopkins 30% of the team targets. Now we are going and looking at this turn. Maybe we see one of these teams take a Lamar Jackson or a Patrick Mahomes. I think that if we see Clanks get the opportunity, he could stack Patrick Mahomes with Travis Kelce, which would be extremely interesting. He takes Mahomes and Kelce. That's exactly what he does. I think that's a fantastic strategy point. Patrick Mahomes is the only quarterback that I would be willing to take in this range outside of Lamar Jackson. And if I was going to take a Patrick Mahomes, I would definitely need to be stacking him with either Tyreek Hill or Travis Kelce. So that makes a ton of sense there. And you have an insanely high ceiling when you pair that team with Christian McCaffrey. Lamar Jackson's off the board now. And if we are looking at these running backs, I really don't like any of them in this range. A lot of them project to have volume, but I don't like the talent of the running backs. So we're going to go over to the wide receiver position. I think that if we are talking redraft fantasy football right now, Allen Robinson is the pick between these wide receivers. If it was dynasty, Juju Smith-Schuster would be my pick here every single time, but we are just playing for 2020 redraft, so we are going to slam on the wide receiver button with Allen Robinson, and our strategy is going perfectly with what we were expecting to do going into the draft. We are going to take that stud 3-down running back to anchor us at our RB1 spot. Then we are going to load up on a ton of talented wide receivers and then try to backfill those wide receiver 2 weeks with a platoon of guys and just whoever is going to get the opportunity for that week. Now, we see a couple players that I'm not necessarily interested in this range going off the board, such as a James Conner and a Mark Andrews. I like Mark Andrews a ton in Dynasty Fantasy Football and in tight end premium leagues, but in this format, I've experienced that you can actually go out there and wait pretty much as long as you can on the tight end position, and you're going to find some great values. Now, with Robert Woods, I think that is a little early. I would much rather have a guy like Odell or Amari over Woods, even though I feel that his price in Dynasty is appropriate with where you can get him. Now we are seeing a good wide receiver run here. Hopefully we get a guy that we like falling back to us. I am specifically targeting one of Odell Beckham, Calvin Ridley, DK Metcalf, or DJ Chark. I understand the thesis with Adam Thielen and all the available targets in Minnesota, but I'm not necessarily going to go there unless I'm trying to build a floor, but we already have our floor with Deandre Hopkins and Allen Robinson. So at this point, I think I would rather go with a high upside wide receiver, and we don't even have to face that decision as we see Adam Thielen, who was the value on the board, go off at the 403. Hopefully, we see a couple of these teams take these trapped running backs, such as a Chris Carson, David Johnson, Todd Gurley, or a Le'Veon Bell at this point. I don't expect them to, especially with the two teams before us having two running backs as is, but it would be a great sight to see. We see Chris Carson going off the board. That's exactly what we wanted. Now we can confidently say we are going to get one of Odell or Calvin Ridley. And Calvin Ridley's off the board. Maybe we end up having to settle with a DK Metcalf, but we will wait to see what falls to us with Point God going here at the 406. He takes Todd Gurley, a player that we were not necessarily interested in whatsoever here with these great wide receivers on the board. I'm going to be extremely happy pressing that button on Odell Beckham Jr., who's a player that disappointed a ton of fantasy owners in 2019, but he was dealing with the sports hernia. It was his first year in Cleveland with Baker Mayfield, and we all know the coaching situation was horrendous. So hopefully the grass is greener in 2020, and we see these wide receivers continue to fly off the board. In the past 20 or so picks, about 75% of them have been wide receivers, and that is the value in this range, and that's why you have to go with a guy like Dalvin Cook over Devontae Adams in the first round. Now, Le'Veon Bell at the 410, I'm going to say it outright. I really don't like that pick of Le'Veon Bell. If I was going to go with a running back, I think I would actually prefer a Melvin Gordon. But still, in this range, the value is the wide receivers. I think DJ Chark and Terry McLaurin both provide a lot more upside as well as having a decent floor. But now let's see where Clanks starts us off with the 501. Clanks has been absolutely killing this draft, getting Terry McLaurin as his wide receiver 1. That's a player that has a ton of upside and a high floor in 2020. Then he goes with Kareem Hunt. I mean, Clanks is just destroying this draft. I think he has my favorite team so far. I mean, you can't really go wrong with Christian McCaffrey being your running back 1, then having Kareem Hunt as your RB2, who has a decent floor with his pass catching ability. And if anything happens to Nick Chubb, Kareem Hunt is an automatic top 5 running back in fantasy football. See Keenan Allen and Cam Akers go off the board. I like seeing those two players go off the board. I'm still not looking at the running backs in this range. I know that's crazy. I know some of y'all are screaming at me to go out there and get a running back, but trust me, guys, I promise you, the best way to build your team at this point is through these wide receivers with guys like Courtland Sutton, Marquise Brown, and Stephon Diggs. they are going to be the values. The only guy I would have considered at this pick would have been Melvin Gordon. But here, I think we have a clear pick with Courtland Sutton as our wide receiver 4. And the thesis with this pick is we are going to continue to slam wide receivers for the next round or two. And then we are going to spend a significant amount of roster spots and draft capital into the running back position. Hopefully, we hit on a couple guys that can pop and provide us those RB2 weeks. And then we are going to be able to roll out 4 top 15 wide receivers with our 3 starting spots and our flex play, as well as having Dalvin Cook. It's going to be extremely hard to beat this team if we can backfill those RB2 weeks, which I have great targets later on in this draft. Make sure you stay till the end and find out who those are and what players we are going to be looking for and what prototype of players complete this build. Now we see Stephon Diggs and Will Fuller both go off the board, followed by Marquise Brown. Love all 3 of those picks. I think I would go with Will Fuller and Marquise Brown over Stephon Diggs, but can't blame the thought process. They're getting Stephon Diggs as your wide receiver 1. Buffalo just spent an insane amount of draft capital to go out there and get Stephon Diggs. But if we were looking at the board, I think we still see a bunch of these trap running backs, such as Mark Ingram, Devin Singletary, Raheem Mostert, David Montgomery. I'm not necessarily interested in any of these guys. I could be looking at a Ronald Jones or a DeAndre Swift with my 6th round pick if it gets to that point and we don't like any wide receivers at that range. I think that would be a great play that we could have with a decent floor and a high ceiling, because we are trying to win this league. We're not just trying to make the playoffs. We are trying to be the best team, and we are trying to be a juggernaut down the stretch. Now, the 601, Devontae Parker, a very interesting player that I actually have a ton of places in Dynasty with Devontae Parker, and that's due to his really great profile as a prospect, and he was actually a lot younger than most people want to think, just because we've been talking about him for about 5 seasons now. He came into the league at a young age. He's still in his prime. The Miami Dolphins just gave him a great extension, and he's going to be having the best quarterback play of his entire career. Brandon Cooks at the 602. Brandon Cooks has been a player that I'm traditionally all over every single season, but it's hard to believe in him going to an offense that already has Will Fuller, who they prototype to be the same type of wide receiver. Now we see some tight ends going off the board, which is what we really like to see, because like I said, we are going to be able to find great tight end value late. Now we are going to be trying to determine if we are going to press the button on a running back or a wide receiver here. I think the best available wide receiver for us would be a Michael Gallup, but I think the value with a Ronald Jones is best as of now, and J.K. Dobbins goes off right before us, and that pick makes a ton of sense for Point God, who already has his stud 3 running backs, so he's going to be able to keep J.K. Dobbins on the bench until he becomes a feature back down the stretch. Now we are going to take Ronald Jones, who I believe has a secure role in Tampa, especially with Keyshawn Vaughn being on the COVID list, not really being able to participate with the team. It locks in Ronald Jones. We've heard what Bruce Arians has been saying with Ronald Jones, and we know that he has the profile to where he can actually be a featured down running back. He's extremely young. He's actually younger than the rookie Keyshawn Vaughn. So he's a player that I love to get in the 6th round every single time as our RB2. And now we are not even going to have to sweat in finding that running back production. Now, if we are going to go out there and look at our round 7 picks, I know I love to wait on quarterback, but if quarterback's going to be the best value on the board, I think what we're going to try to do is we are going to try to stack Deandre Hopkins with Kyler Murray. I think that would be extremely interesting if we can go Kyler Murray with our 7th round pick and then follow it up with Christian Kirk in the 8th. That would give us a great bet if the Arizona Cardinals offense comes out and is a potent, most powerful offense in the NFL. We are going to have a juggernaut of a team, and that's going to give us an extremely high ceiling to where we can actually win the league. But instead, we see Kyler Murray go off the board at the 702. I think we are going to see a quarterback run right here. And yes, that does happen with Deshaun Watson. I do like Dak Prescott and Russell Wilson quite a bit, but the problem is I don't see any stacks available with those 2 players. So I think we are going to continue to wait on the quarterback position. Now, if we are going across the board, though, we do see a traditional drop-off, which tends to occur in this range. If we were looking at these wide receivers, nobody really screams as a value to me. We look at the tight ends, we just don't really have anybody that stands out from the pack. We look at the running backs, I mean, there's not much here. I think that we're actually going to have to go with Dak Prescott as the clear value on the board. And even though we don't have a stack, maybe we can get CeeDee Lamb later in the draft and get Blake Jarwin as our tight end 1 and create a backfill with their wide receiver 3 and their tight end, just in case that Dallas offense ends up being the best offense in the NFL, which is completely possible in 2020. Antonio Gibson to point guard off the board at the 707. The reason I love that pick for point guard is he already has those stud running backs that he started the draft with. So at this point, he's going all upside at the running back position. But I will say that I think that after that 7th round pick, he's going to have to switch over and he's going to have to go wide receiver heavy here on out, especially in the format where you have to start 3 wide receivers. I don't think it makes sense to continue to hammer home those running backs when you already have some great high upside guys. And if he does continue to hammer in those running backs, that's going to be bad news for us because we are going to try to backfill our depth while we already have our 4 wide receiver studs and our quarterback stud. Now, I will try to identify why I actually went with a stud quarterback in this format. I think that 2020 is the year to go out there and get a Kyler Murray, Deshaun Watson, Russell Wilson, or Dak Prescott. I think they are finally priced appropriately. Y'all know that in the years past, I've loved to go as late as I possibly can at the quarterback position. But the thing with all 4 of these quarterbacks is they all have the potential to be a top 5 passer in the NFL, and they all have the potential to be a top 5 rushing quarterback in the NFL. And when you have that upside, it makes a ton of sense to be going here in this range as a target for us. Now, we are seeing these running backs and wide receivers being soaked up, and that's not what we want to see. If we are looking at the position right now, there aren't necessarily any guys that scream as values. I think we're going to go with a CeeDee Lamb to stack with our Dak Prescott. Really hope Point God doesn't go there. He decides to take Tom Brady instead, and that is beautiful for us as we do get our stack with Dak Prescott, and we already have our 4 elite wide receivers. So similar to how I was saying it was great for Point God to be going out there and getting those running backs that may not have immediate opportunity, but they have upside down the stretch. CeeDee Lamb is the exact same thing where we are not going to have to put him in our starting lineup until down the stretch in the 2020 season, where hopefully he breaks out and we see an A.J. Brown type ascension. And if that happens with Dak Prescott, we are going to have a significant advantage over our teammates. Now, hopefully we see more quarterbacks go off the board between our next pick. Just because we already have Dak Prescott, I can confidently say we are not going to be drafting another quarterback in this draft because you are going to be able to find options on the waiver wire. What we want to do is we want to load up with wide receivers and running backs. Our next target and the best player available is actually going to be Christian Kirk. And I know y'all are saying, Mason, you already have 5 wide receivers. What would you be doing looking at a guy like Christian Kirk over getting your 3rd running back? And my point is we are going to try to soak up these wide receivers while they still have projected volume and efficiency. And then we are going to spend a ton of roster spots on running backs and just pray that a couple of them pop off and we can slide them in our running back 2 position with Ronald Jones. Every single week we are going to be playing a wide receiver in our flex position. And every single week we are going to have Dalvin Cook as our running back 1. So it makes no sense to go out there and really feel the need to draft a high upside, high floor running back when we can just draft a ton of high upside running backs and not necessarily worry about the floor. But we see Alex go out there and take Christian Kirk, definitely the best value available, and that kind of hurts our draft plans. Now we're having to scramble. I think Mecole Hardman is confidently the pick here out of this group of wide receivers. Then there is a decent drop-off. If we look at the running backs, I believe that we're either going to go with Phillip Lindsey or Tevin Coleman. but we are just going to have to pray that we do end up getting Mecole Hardman, and that is probably going to be our last wide receiver of the draft, as that will be our 6th. And then we are going to finish the draft out with just going running backs, running backs, running backs. And yes, Mecole Hardman falls to us, so we're going to take him with our 9th round pick. So to go through our roster so far, we have Dalvin Cook, DeAndre Hopkins, Allen Robinson, Odell Beckham, Courtland Sutton, Ronald Jones, Dak Prescott, CeeDee Lamb, and Mecole Hardman. Now, this is a great combination of stud wide receivers as well as high upside plays. If we see something happen to Tyreek Hill, Mecole Hardman possibly becomes a top 15 fantasy wide receiver in 2020. And even if we don't see a Tyreek Hill injury, with his speed and playing with Patrick Mahomes, Mecole Hardman only needs about 5 targets a week to really be a significant player, because he does have that big playability. Now we see Drew Brees go off at the 9-10. Drew Brees and Tom Brady, I'll be completely transparent, I do not like taking them in 2020 at this point, just because I don't really understand the upside. I would rather have a guy like Josh Allen, who has better rushing production, and I understand Drew Brees and Tom Brady are significantly more talented NFL quarterbacks than Josh Allen, who does have his accuracy concerns. But we are not necessarily trying to build a real-life NFL team here. What we are trying to do is we are trying to score fantasy points, and how you do that is getting a rushing quarterback. Now we are about 4 or 5 picks away. So what we are hoping for is we are hoping for some of these running backs to fall. We want to see a Josh Allen go off the board. That way we can get to the Phillip Lindsey, Chase Edmonds, A.J. Dillon, Sony Michel, or Darrell Henderson. Really, any of these running backs I'm going to be completely fine with. Tony Pollard actually really stands out as a play here. I think how we are going to rank these running backs is Phillip Lindsey, Chase Edmonds, then Tony Pollard. Hopefully we can find one of these guys. It's really likely, and maybe we can actually double up. The problem is drafting in the middle. It's hard to project who you're going to be able to get with your next pick. You just kind of have to get your guy and then see what falls back to you. Josh Allen at the 10:04. That's fantastic value, as Josh Allen can lead the NFL in rushing in 2020. It's a complete possibility, especially with Stephon Diggs stretching the field for them. So now we are going to go with Phillip Lindsey. And if I would have had another running back or 2 on the roster before this pick, I think I would have actually gone with Chase Edmonds or Tony Pollard over Phillip Lindsey, because I feel that they have a higher ceiling than Phillip Lindsey. But due to only having 2 running backs on our roster, and Phillip Lindsey being our 3rd drafted, I think it's safe to go out there and get the guy that should have a role even with Melvin Gordon in town. So if something does happen to Ronald Jones or Dalvin Cook, Phillip Lindsey can slide as our RB2 for any given week, and he does have the upside if anything happens to Melvin Gordon. So it's a great combination of a floor and ceiling pick as our RB3. Now at the 10:08, we see Tony Pollard go off the board by Big C, and that's a great pick. We are obviously looking at him in the 11th round. Now we have to pray that our next target, Chase Edmonds, just goes off the board. I mean, these are great drafters here. Clearly, Chase Edmonds was a guy that I really was wanting in the 11th round. I could have even made a case for taking him in the 10th round over Phillip Lindsey, with Kenyon Drake being in a walking boot. Now we see the 2 New York Giants wide receivers go off the board with Darius Slayton and Sterling Shepard. I know a ton of people are all over Darius Slayton this offseason, but I think that Sterling Shepard is actually a great value. I made a wide receiver video on them a couple months back, and I think that even though Darius Slayton is the more exciting player, he can make plays down the field, I would prefer Sterling Shepard in fantasy football at his price, just because you can tend to get him a round after Darius Slayton, and I think that they project to have very similar upsides and floors. Now, Noah Fant goes off the board. That's a fantastic, fantastic pick. But if we look at these tight ends, I mean, we still have a ton of options for us. And I mean, if we are even just looking down here, Dallas Goedert all the way down the board, a ton of people still have their tight ends. So I think we're going to continue to hammer in running backs, then look at tight end in the 12th or 13th round. And remember, we are trying to get that Dallas stack with our quarterback. We already have Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb, so a Blake Jarwin throw-in would be fantastic, especially if anything happens to a player like Michael Gallup. we know that CeeDee Lamb and Blake Jarwin are going to be getting significantly more targets than they would otherwise. Aaron Rodgers at the 11.2 after the team has already selected Kyler Murray is definitely not ideal, but that is an auto pick, so we can kind of overlook that, but this is the range that Aaron Rodgers should be going in, but I would take Carson Wentz ahead of him. Carson Wentz at this point in the 11th round would be a fantastic value, but we already went out there and got Dak Prescott with our 7th round pick, and we are kind of committing ourselves to just drafting one quarterback after that. We love seeing defenses go off the board at this point. I think it's entirely too early for them, even though that if you watched my waiver wire video, this is the year for the early defense. So if we are looking at the running back and the tight end position, the tight ends available are definitely a lot better than the running backs, but the problem is there are so many tight ends that I feel that we are going to be able to get a guy with our next pick. So we are going to go with the best available running back here, which is going to be Sony Michel, who has fallen drastically this offseason with news that he could start on the PUP. N'Keal Harry at the 11.07. Point guard, come on, man. I know that's completely a homer pick. You could have waited a couple more rounds to get N'Keal Harry. I think John Brown, Michael Pittman, Brashad Perriman. Actually, never mind. I'm sorry, point guard, for coming at you. These wide receivers are entirely soaked up. I did not pay attention to how many have gone off the board at this point, and this is why we went out there and went with the Deandre Hopkins, Allen Robinson, Odell Beckham, and Courtland Sutton for to start, because it clearly dried up. And after Mecole Hardman with our 9th round pick, we are not interested in taking any more wide receivers, as I think the value at this point is going to be running back and tight end. So if the tight ends fall back to us, I know we are targeting Blake Jarwin, but it's going to be a massive reach on Blake Jarwin. I think we're actually going to go with a TJ Hawkinson or an Austin Hooper. Sleeper just has Jared Cook ranked entirely incorrect. That's a horrible rankings, and that shows that Sleeper is very inefficient, and you should not be looking at their draft boards to make your decision. But Mike Williams, Michael Pittman go off the board, and we want to see these wide receivers continue to be drafted, as we already have our stud wide receivers in our lineup. We just look at our starting lineup at this point. Dak Prescott, Dalvin Cook, Ronald Jones, DeAndre Hopkins, Allen Robinson, Odell Beckham, Courtland Sutton, and on our bench, CeeDee Lamb, Mecole Hardman, Phillip Lindsey, and Sony Michel. We are going to continue to fill out that bench with running back positions, just because we want to try to get some guys that have a high enough upside. If anything happens to the running backs ahead of them, they can be significant contributors and they can be potentially league winners. So now if we are looking at this, I wanted to go tight end here, but without seeing any of them go off the board, I think we may try to push it another round, and we may take our favorite running back available. And looking through the board, we are going to try to identify someone who has a high ceiling, and I think that guy is going to actually be Darrell Henderson. He plays in a great offense, and yes, I understand that Cam Akers is most likely a significantly better running back than Darrell Henderson, but we can't say so for certain. And at the same time, Darrell Henderson is going to fit into our team where he's not necessarily a starter right away. So we can wait a couple weeks and see what the situation is like in LA, and Darrell Henderson may win that role. Even though we know that these tight ends available are going to outscore Darrell Henderson, we have to understand supply and demand, and that's why we are going to continue to press the button on these running backs until we are forced to take tight ends. And this is why we avoided the Travis Kelce in round 2. I know maybe a lot of people would have wanted to go that route, but without really being likely to get Patrick Mahomes in the 3rd round, I think that it would have been kind of silly to go with a Travis Kelce in the 2nd round when we still have players like Austin Hooper, TJ Hawkinson, Mike Gesicki, Chris Herndon available to us in the 13th. Well, let's see, Alex, and I believe, yes, another timeout. You hate to see that. Adrian Peterson may have been his pick. Let's see how many running backs he had on his team. He had 4 running backs. Adrian Peterson is his 5th. He's taken about 5 wide receivers in a row before any running backs, so that does fit his team construction. So the draft is not entirely thrown off like Mondo auto-drafting Aaron Rodgers with his 11th round pick. More wide receivers going off the board is exactly what we want to see. We only see one tight end go off between our picks. I mean, it's crazy. It's crazy to say, but I think we're going to have to go running back here again and then get tight ends with our 14th and 15th round pick because these guys are just getting soaked up. The best running back available for my money is going to be Keyshawn Vaughn, but we already have Ronald Jones, and I know some people would like to pair those two together just to get a higher floor, but I'm playing all for ceiling. Yet, if we are looking at this pool of running backs, I think that if we are drafting a Keyshawn Vaughn, it's not like we are going out of our way to get those two paired. That is just the best available, so we're not necessarily losing any value. And I think we're just going to take the best value, which is going to be Keyshawn Vaughn in the 13th round. Now, due to team construction, we see point guard go with his third tight end, TJ Hawkinson. He's probably annoyed that the tight ends continue to fall this far after taking Mark Andrews in the third, I believe. We see TJ Hawkinson and Austin Hooper go off the board. Hopefully we don't see all of the tight ends soaked up. I'm not too concerned about it because we are going to be able to get one of our targets, and even if our last guy we get is Blake Jarwin, I do not have a major problem with that. And guys, this is why we have to pay attention. You have to scroll down on Sleeper because there are some guys that are just entirely priced incorrectly, such as Thaddeus Moss and Josh Oliver, going over guys like Irv Smith and Jay Sternberger and Ian Thomas. I mean, Sleeper is just horrible in terms of their ADP and rankings, so you have to pay attention on what's going on. There are players like Christian Kirk who are entirely too low, and you're going to miss out on them if you don't scroll down. But I think at this point, clearly the best tight end available is going to be either Mike Gesicki or Dallas Goedert. We just have to hope that one of them falls to us in this 14th round, and then we are going to be able to get either one of the other ones, or we are going to go out there and get Blake Jarwin in the 15th. So Chris Herndon goes off the board in the 14th. Now we are just hoping that we can get Mike Gesicki. And, I mean, if we end up getting Mike Gesicki and Dallas Goedert, we just completely smash this draft. We read the room entirely correct. And, I mean, Mike Gesicki, the 14th round. This is why you're going to wait on tight ends in leagues that don't have a tight end premium spot in 2020. The position is so deep, and Mike Gesicki does have the upside in Miami where there is not a ton of target competition to be a top 5 tight end, especially if you just look up his athletic measurables. Mike Gesicki is an absolute freak in terms of his speed, agility, and size. And I want to give a massive thank you to everyone who has participated in this mock draft. I mean, this has been great. We've only had a couple timeouts. People are getting their picks in very timely, and that's exactly what you want to see in a mock draft. Now, in the 15th round, we are just having to pray that Dallas Goedert falls to us. If not, we are going to take Blake Jarwin. We're fine with either. Now we see Clank's timeout with Tyrell Williams, another wide receiver, but then he goes back and takes Curtis Samuel. I mean, this is what we need. We need a ton of teams taking wide receivers in this range. We are completely out on the position at this point. Malcolm Brown in the 15th round. This is why we went instead of taking a TJ Hawkinson or an Austin Hooper, we took Keyshawn Vaughn in the 13th. We identified a drop-off in talent, and we wanted to get that last tier running back and continue to push the tight ends down the board. I mean, I think it's going to happen. I think we are going to get Dallas Goedert in the 15th round, which is absolutely crazy, especially considering we see Jalen Reagor go down with and have to have an MRI today, and who knows what his week 1 status is going to be. So Dallas Goedert in the 15th. Come on, let's lock it in. Big C, avoid the man. He goes with Chase Claypool, and bam, we just doubled up with tight ends. We took Dallas Goedert in the 15th round after getting Mike Gesicki in the 14th. I could not be any more happy with this team as it turned out. We are going to go through and give y'all a recap. Let's just go to the top so y'all can see the way that the draft board went. We started off with Dalvin Cook. I think that was a great decision to go with the running back over Devontae Adams. Then we hammered in these wide receivers, and I mean, this went exactly how we planned. Deandre Hopkins, Allen Robinson, Odell Beckham, Courtland Sutton. Then we followed it up with a high floor, high upside RB2 with Ronald Jones in the 6th round. We identified the value with Dak Prescott in the 7th. Then we got some high upside guys completing the Dallas stack with CeeDee Lamb in the 8th and McCall Hardman in the 9th. Then we went through, attacked the running back position with volume, taking 4 in a row. This is going to be our platoon of running backs to potentially fill in for Ronald Jones as our RB2 if anything happens or if any of these guys reach their ceilings. Then we get 2 tight ends who are both have a range of outcomes that they could be top 5 at their positions. And this is exactly what we are wanting. Now we're going to have to go with a kicker and a defense. We're looking at the defenses. I think New England really sticks out to us here in the 16th round. It's the best available, and we're going to be able to get them with both teams before us already having defenses. I mean, guys, this draft could not have fallen any better. If this was a real league, I would be ecstatic. I would be trying to get everyone to double in their buy-in and trying to take down the title. But this is why you go with that stud running back and then you load up on those wide receivers in the rounds 2 through 5. I mean, you try to avoid those running backs that are trap running backs, and you try to get the guys that are going to have an opportunity in some weeks, but you just don't know when later on in the draft, and you can play those with a platoon in down the stretch as your RB2. Now we are just going to wait out the draft, take our best available kicker at the 17th round, and really hope y'all enjoyed this video. If y'all did, please make sure you go down there. Please give it a like, comment what your favorite team was in this draft. I'll go through the board right now. So I'll scroll slowly, pause the video if you need to, but I can also put this down for y'all. Bam, that's a good view of the draft board. You see a lot of blue in the rounds 2 through 6. I think that's when we should be soaking up those wide receivers and avoiding the trap running backs, and then going out and getting our quarterback in round 7. I mean, getting a guy like Kyler Murray, Deshaun Watson, Russell Wilson, or Dak Prescott. All of those guys have the upside to be the quarterback 1 overall. Then following it up with 2 more wide receivers. We did not necessarily love the running backs in this range. And then we identified that after McCall Hardman, there was going to be a drop-off in talent at wide receiver. Then you load up on the running backs, and then you can take your first tight ends in the very end of the draft. I mean, great. And I understand people are going to say, Mason, you should take a second quarterback, and I definitely should not. There is no situation where I'd be starting any other quarterback over Dak Prescott unless we see an injury, and if that's the case, look at all these quarterbacks that are going to be on the waiver wire: Daniel Jones, Ben Roethlisberger, Baker Mayfield, Jared Goff, Ryan Tannehill, Drew Lock, Jimmy Garoppolo, Gardner Minshew, Phillip Rivers, Teddy Bridgewater, Kirk Cousins, Derek Carr, Sam Darnold. I mean, there are just a ton of quarterbacks. I don't have to worry about Dak Prescott getting injured and me not being able to replace him or bye weeks whatsoever. We're going to take the Atlanta kicker here with our last pick. Atlanta is a high-powered offense, and you want the kickers for teams that are going to be able to go out there and perform. Now, that's all I got for y'all. I mean, the rest of the draft is just pretty much going to be kickers and defenses and waiver wire players, so I'm not going to stick around that long. But thanks, guys. I really appreciate y'all checking out the video. Really appreciate anybody who participated in the mock draft. If you want to get in the next one, make sure you go down there. Make sure you go to the description of the video and join our Discord chat. And yeah, that's all I got for y'all. Have a great day, guys.